Alright, hello YouTube, and I'm back with the lesson. I'm actually gonna start off by doing like a little series on Linux and how to use it while my roommate's not here. Also think I'd show you guys something cool. This is the division I was in with when I was in boot camp, so that'd be kind of cool to show it. Alright, so what is Linux? Linux is a monolithic kernel for an operating system. So to say Linux is an operating system is technically improper, but we generally just call Linux operating systems because it's just a whole lot easier to do, and a kernel is a big part of an operating system. There's a couple different parts to an operating system. Technically, the operating system is the part that the user interfaces with, and the kernel is the underlying part. We'll get to that in a second. Who developed Linux? Linus Torvalds, and actually I spelled that wrong, not Linux. Linus Torvalds in the late 1980s and early 1990s while he was a student at the University of Helsinki. I'll get into a little bit more of how, like, what inspired him to do it. So Linux is not an operating system, which is correct. Linux by itself cannot be a full operating system, it is just a kernel. However, by combining Linux with GNU, or GNU's not Unix, as the acronym stands for, it produces a full operating system with desktop environments and applications. What is a kernel? A kernel is a bridge between applications and the actual data being processed done at the hardware level of computing. So the kernel deals more with the hardware side. So you have two parts. You have the kernel, which kind of deals a little bit more with the hardware, and then you have the actual operating itself. The operating system is stuff like this. This is like what I interface with here. You know, folders, applications such as Firefox. But if we use the terminal, the terminal can kind of do stuff directly with the kernel. You know, change directory, desktop. This kind of works more with the kernel, your terminal or command prompt. Oh, wrong thing to pull up. Alright. Now, what does Linux have to do with Unix? Linux is a Unix-based operating system, which means it possesses many similar qualities in desktop in design and implementation as Unix. However, to be technical, Linux was more inspired by Minix and which was created by Andrew Tenenbaum and the Solaris project. So Linus Torvalds, whenever he was going to college at the University of Helsinki, he worked with Solaris, but he came across Minix created by Andrew Tenenbaum, and he really liked Minix, but one thing that he saw that wasn't happening is Minix was designed to be rather it was designed to be ran off of a floppy disk because it was cheaper. Minix was designed for the college student who couldn't afford computer hardware, whereas Linux saw this and he wanted more to be added onto it. He wanted to see it grow more as an operating system. So what is special about it? Since Linux is free and open source, it allows the user to customize it at a higher level than closed source proprietary systems such as Windows or Mac OS. Linux is used a lot in the server world because it's customization, and in fact it runs most of the world's servers. Also, Linux looks at everything as a file, so it's easier to manage as a server in most instances. That goes the same with any Unix system. That's a big characteristic of Unix systems, is that everything is looked at as a file. And going back to the higher level than a closed source proprietary system. With Windows and Mac OS, you don't get the source code to the operating system, so there are things you cannot change about the operating system. Mostly it's like a whole lot lower level managing stuff like that compared to Linux. So what's the meaning of free and open source? The operating system can be acquired with no cost. A little tongue tied. The distributors of an operating system offer the source code to it online, free. Users are encouraged to play with it, so you are encouraged to modify the source code to fit your needs. The only thing that they ask is that if you make any improvements or like any security improvements, that you tell them about it, so that way they can incorporate it with future releases of the operating system. So if you find a hack, please let them know, because if you find it or if you code it and fix it, let them know, so that way they can either work on it or they can include it into the next release that they have. Alright, so let's talk a little bit about GNU. GNU was started by Richard Stallman, who is the leader of the Free Software Movement and Foundation. Richard Stallman and his colleagues were working on an operating system, but were missing the key element of the kernel. Then when Linus Torvalds, once again, I misspelled his name, Linus Torvalds developed the Linux kernel, they adopted it to their operating system product, which is how we get GNU Linux, which would technically be you would technically call that to just about any Linux operating system. You'd call it GNU Linux because Linux is the kernel, GNU is the actual operating system per se, it's the actual applications. So if I was looking at a Linux system here, all of this would be the product of GNU, but since this isn't a Linux operating system, this isn't GNU. Keep pulling that up. Just also another interesting fact about Linux and how it's got its name. It originally wasn't going to be called Linux, but what happened is where he was storing the files and everything on a server, his friend thought it'd be a joke to name the file where he was storing this project. He thought it would be funny to name it Linux because generally the X at the end of things denotes some sort of Unix relationship, and then from then it just kind of became known as Linux. So Linus, Linux. His friend thought it would be a joke to throw an X instead of an S, and it just kind of stuck. So this is kind of like the opening beginning of as to what is Linux. Just the very basics. If you want to know a little bit more about operating system designs, I would suggest this book. There's a couple versions, but it is an extremely good book. The version I had before I gave it away, the version I had actually included the source code to the Minix operating system, which is about 300 pages of code. But of course I didn't read through it, but it was kind of nice just to kind of be able to thumb through it and kind of glance at it and see what all went into it. Also another interesting fact is Linux, as well as most operating systems, are coded in the C programming language. So that's just kind of an interesting thing to know, is that if you do want to kind of play around with the source code and such, you're going to have to know a little bit of C. Also, if you want to understand it, probably going to have to know a little bit of C. Alright, so this is the basic introduction to Linux. Next one, I hope to VirtualBox a Linux operating system and kind of walk you through basic terminal stuff and maybe some of the settings and such. Alright, so this is it for this video, and I should have it posted here in a few minutes. Out.